good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about emotional intelligence, the importance of acknowledging your emotions and understanding them. You know, I think more often than not in the society that we live in, we have a tendency of not giving ourselves time to process our emotions, to understand where it's coming from. You know, even when we break up with somebody, we have a tendency of doing what? Jumping back into a new relationship immediately without understanding what was wrong with the previous relationship and why it didn't work out. It seems like we'd rather just jump through life, not mourning the situations, not dealing with it, and not accepting our emotions until eventually something breaks. And it seems like everything hits us at once. And then we wonder why this is happening in our life. You know, on this show, on Live Your True Life Perspectives, I always have people on the show that I think can really add to the conversation, that can bring a new point of light, a new perspective that we can really talk about and incorporate into our day-to-day lives. Join me all the way from Los Angeles, California, a good friend of mine and someone that I believe really has the finger on the pulse when it comes to emotional intelligence. Micaela Passeri joins me live in studio. Micaela, it's so glad to have you live. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm glad to have you because when we met a while back, I remember you were talking to me about being an emotional intelligence expert and how most people call you the heart opener, and I thought that was pretty powerful stuff. So tell me, what does it mean to be an emotional intelligence expert?
Well, so emotional intelligence is really about awareness, bringing awareness to your state, emotional state, and understanding why you are experiencing a certain emotion and what you're feeling, so that then you can self-regulate and respond instead of react to whatever is in front of you. So whether it's a situation, a person, an event, you're able to manage yourself. And instead of having those highs and lows, right? We go through big highs and then big, deep lows. You're actually navigating life on more of an even keel. And you can experience ease and grace instead of frustration and maybe depression or feeling stuck, right?
I understand, you know, as a therapist, as you know, when I have clients in my office, a lot of times they don't understand where emotions come from. Or they don't understand why they feel angry. And I think you and I understand that a lot of people hold deep-seated resentments and anger. But tell me a little bit more about, you know, when you're dealing with a specific client and you're dealing with emotional intelligence, how do you navigate to show them kind of where that's coming from?
So the first thing is to have them practice self-awareness. And so usually one of the first things that I do when I work with a client, in fact, their first homework, because I do give homework to people, I make them work. And the reason is because life, in order to shift in life and to get to the next better feeling place, you've got to put some effort in it, right? Because or else it'd be way too easy, right? So the first thing I do is I have them observe their thoughts. I have them observe their feelings, how they're feeling, how they're experiencing life. So I have them journal and really practice that self-awareness. Understand when you can bring attention to what's happening within you, then you can start understanding, where is it coming from? Why am I feeling that way? And then when you can understand, then you can manage. In fact, those are the fundamentals of emotional intelligence. There's 4 cornerstones. And the first one is identifying the emotion that you're experiencing, so what you're feeling. Understanding why. So where is it coming from? Why am I feeling that way? Maybe it's a trigger. Maybe it's something, you know, that's reminding you of something, right? And the third cornerstone is the managing. Once you know and you identify and you understand the emotion that you're experiencing, then you can actually manage yourself. And so that means that instead of going through life from a reactive place, you're actually going through life from a proactive and from a conscious responsive place, right? You're making conscious decisions on how you're responding to situations and people in your life. And that could be your personal relationships, romantic relationships, family relationships, business relationships, right? It doesn't matter. It's how we relate and interrelate with one another. And the fourth cornerstone is being able to then use it to your benefit. And that really means allowing it to then empower you to use it to shift to that positive state of being.
That's awesome, because I think a lot of times folks have a tendency of escaping and running from emotions.
Yes.
Alcohol, drugs, pharmaceuticals, pain pills.
Eat food.
Food.
Right?
Yeah, food's a big one.
Yeah, food's a huge one.
I mean, whoever started the concept of comfort food?
Right.
Very interesting, right?
Yep.
I mean, I don't really think food as like a blanket, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But for some people, they need that to feel better. And what is it that you're just trying to fill a void?
You're filling something, right?
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so when we begin with the concept of identifying emotion, and I think it's something we can walk through here on the show, because I think everybody listening right now to the show, you've had a time in your life where you felt off. You have felt unproductive. You felt upset, angry, saddened, despair. Yeah, even depressed. And I think depressed is a big one, because the first thing that most people say when you ask them why is, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And the I don't know, you and I both know the I don't know is, come on, we got to get to
It's an easy cop out.
It is. So how do you move past that with folks when you're working with them, when you're asking them about emotion, and they goes, I really don't know where it's coming from?
I ask them to look deeper and really to kind of take that breath and acknowledge that maybe they might not be wanting to look, right? And to just look deeper. And then when they actually take that breath and bring that awareness, then they can actually see and understand, right? In fact, a lot of times when I work with clients, their first response might be, well, I don't know. I usually have people go through an emotional intelligence test as an intake part of their first introduction to my work. And I do get some people that go, well, I don't know, as an answer. And it's an easy way to not do the work. And like I said at the beginning, I make people do homework for a reason, because it's about staying in that space, and it's practicing self-awareness, self-regulation, looking within, looking at those parts of us that society teaches us that's not important, right?
You're right, because it a lot of times it tells us just to move on. Just get going. Just get up, rub some dirt on it, and move on.
Yeah, it's like, oh, come on, just dust it off and keep going, right? Or society judges us, right? If we're a woman and we're too emotional, or we go into our emotional state, we're weak. And if we're a man and we're emotional or show emotions, then we're a wuss, right? So then there's that fear of judgment that also comes up for people, and then they go into more of a stoic place of being, where it's like, I'm going to just push through. I was in fact talking to a lady earlier today about, she was like, I thought I had dealt with it. I just pushed through. And it's like, well, that's exactly what made you not deal with it, because you push through instead of just sinking in and allowing yourself to feel the feelings and feel the emotion, which actually allows that energy, because emotion is just energy, right? It's energy. It's an energy surge that comes through our body, and it's meant to be felt and move through our energetic system, otherwise known as the meridian system. And if we don't allow that process to happen, then that energy can get stuck.
It's like when if anybody's ever been to a funeral, I'm sure most people have, right?
Mm-hmm.
You and I both included, and most people listening to the show. It's interesting to watch the folks that really allow the emotion to hit them at a funeral. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to watch the people that are actually supposed to be the closest to the person that just died, not having any emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting how long some people will suppress this type of emotion. And they're like, well, it just really didn't hit me, or it didn't really bother me. And it's like years later, and they're just having this epiphany, and they don't understand where it's coming from, but it's all this stuff that's been swept under the rug.
And it's been just brewing and bubbling inside. And then one day something just pokes it open and it bursts. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. When we come back, we'll talk more about that because I want to talk about I want you to talk about more about energy as well later on in the show, and because I think a lot of people don't really realize that everything is based on energy, on quantum physics, and it's stuff that they need to kind of realize.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like Einstein discovered, right? That this universe that we live in, this physical reality that we live in, is all energy. It's all vibration. And so when we learn to manage and handle the vibration and our vibration specifically, then we're actually able to live our lives from a more peaceful and calm and tranquil place.
When we return, we'll be talking more about energy, more about working on ourselves, and the importance of really handling your emotions. Stay tuned because Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back. You know it. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. We're talking about emotional intelligence with an emotional intelligence expert here in studio. Micaela Passeri is joining me live in studio. Micaela, so we were talking right before the break about how important it is to really recognize and handle your emotions. But we were actually beginning to talk about how everything that we deal with in life has energy and our emotions have energy. Can you explain that?
Yes. So we all know Albert Einstein, right? He is the father of quantum physics. And one of, actually, there's 3 fundamental laws in quantum physics. And the first one is that everything in this physical universe that we live in is energy, right? And that's exactly what Albert Einstein discovered, which means that everything that's made in our reality is made out of an atom. And when you take a look at an atom in a microscope, you see that all it is a empty space, and it's a vibrational energy, right? There's a nucleus, and then there's an electron that orbits the nucleus, and the nucleus is comprised of a proton and neutron, and that electron that orbits the nucleus, right? The electron is negative, and then the nucleus is positive because of the proton. Depending on the velocity of the orbiting and the closeness, it determines the vibration of that atom. So everything in our reality is made up of atoms, right? Our body, the table that we're sitting at right now, the microphone we're speaking in, right? It's all made up of atoms, and everything is vibrating at a certain frequency. And that includes our emotions as well. In fact, the easiest way for people to understand is when you feel an emotion, especially a negative emotion, feels like it's a surge of energy, right? It's a surge that comes through your body like a wave, right? We can't see it, but we can feel it. So that's basically what we're dealing with, is we're dealing with energetics, right, that are vibrating at different frequencies. Anger vibrates at a certain frequency, and at a different frequency that may be, resentment and bitterness or grief, right? They're all vibrating at different frequencies. And so as we are handling ourselves and we are observing our emotions and we're healing our emotional body and our emotional baggage, then we are raising our vibration as a human being.
Very true. And lower vibrational emotions are like anger, fear,
grief, sadness. Shame is actually the lowest. So,
really?
Yes. And actually, a really cool resource for listeners to go and look up is a book by David Hawkins, who is a quantum physicist, a book called Power versus Force. He explains, how kind of we live in this vibrational universe and how we can relate to it. But he created a consciousness scale, and he measured the main emotions of a human being. And at the bottom of the scale is shame. Shame vibrates at a frequency of 20. And obviously our highest vibration is enlightenment, right? So the lower vibrations are pride, anger, bitterness, resentment, fear, shame, grief, sadness.
That's why they make us feel heavy too, right? They make us feel down, beaten down.
Yep.
That's what we say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting how our words, we don't really realize how words are so literal as well.
Words have vibrations as well.
They do.
Yeah. Have you heard of Dr. Emoto?
I
The
have.
Japanese, okay. So, in case your listeners haven't, Dr. Emoto is a Japanese scientist who actually did an experiment with words in water. And he took a bottle of water, froze it, and put the words "thank you" on it. And he took a bottle of water and froze it and put the words "I hate you" on it. And then later he observed the frozen water molecules, and he found that the molecules of the water that had I thank you on it were beautiful snowflake-like crystals. And while the ones on the I hate you bottle were deformed and never really formed, these crystals never really formed. And so he discovered that our words have an effect. They're also vibrational energy, and they have an effect on our body, on our being, right? They surely have an effect on our emotional being. When we hear somebody say something not very nice to us, what do we feel? We feel kind of contracted. We feel hurt, right? When somebody instead maybe praises us for something, a job well done, we feel good. We feel uplifted, right? That's the impact of the energy of a word.
And the impact we have also a lot of times when it's not the outside world that's telling us something, but it's our inside dialogue that's being even more nasty or gnarly than anybody in the outside world could be. And I think a lot of people don't realize how our negative broken record directly relates to the emotions and the feelings that we carry around on a daily basis.
Well, yeah, we are our own worst critics, right? And the negative conversations and thought patterns that we are prolonging and having within ourselves on a daily basis are the ones that keep us stuck, right? They keep us in those broken records. They keep us maybe not taking action, being afraid of taking risk, being afraid of being seen or being judged, right? And sometimes it takes us all the way down into depression, anxiety, all of those conditions that, the outside world wants to just fix with a pill. And in reality, it's just the body saying, alert, alert, alert. There's an emotional imbalance. That's what you got to look at. You got to look at your inside and what's happening. And I can say this because I've experienced it firsthand. I lost my dad when I was 20 years old to a horrible car accident in Bulgaria. And I was angry. I was pissed off at life. And I did not understand why I was the one that had to lose a father. And the years following that, I went into a very deep state of outward lashing. I became, what other people might call bitchy. But it was a response to my pain, right? The pain of the loss. But eventually I developed severe anxiety, panic attacks, to the point where I couldn't walk outside of my house. And it wasn't until I actually was able to have closure with my father, right? So I went through, a therapist actually had me go through a very deep process where I was able to actually have closure. And after that experiences, never had an anxiety attack ever since. And that's been over 25 years ago.
That's amazing. And I think that's a testimony because I think there's a lot of folks out there have lost a family member, have lost a friend, have lost somebody that's very close to them. And there's anger and resentment and sadness and the feeling of being, basically pulled away from that person and the injustice that was done as well. And until we get over it, until we work with it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we don't do in our society today is we let these wounds just fester and we don't do anything about it. And then we wonder why we're in a bad mood or why we have anxiety attacks or panic attacks. And as a therapist, I've worked with clients in the very beginning where they'll tell me they've had multiple panic attacks, multiple anxiety attacks. And then when you finally start, it doesn't take many layers to pull back to realize,
where the cause is.
Yeah, what the cause is. And it could be something, very heinous and very recent or years ago, but still wasn't dealt with.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, the reason why also I tell that story is because they wanted to put me on Paxil. They wanted to put me on medication. Oh. So had I done that, who knows who I would be right now and where I would be, right? Because I would have never actually sought to find out what the really root cause was. And it was emotional. It was basically me not having had the chance to say my last goodbye, having really grieved for him, having really felt that I had that closure that I needed because I was never going to be able to see him again. And so I say it to say, a lot of our dis-ease is emotional based. And our body is an alarm. Our body tells us through dis-ease, through discomfort, through maybe pain, physical pain, it tells us that there is an emotional imbalance. And that's really where we need to go first before we go to medication.
And I think that medication has its place sometimes when it's a fresh thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I do agree that a lot of us don't realize that medication changes your brain chemistry. And it takes about a year after being on a medication for your brain chemistry to go back to the way it was in the beginning. If you look at studies, there have been studies on street drugs and cocaine and different drugs like that, where it shows you how long it takes for the brain to repair itself. Just like any drug, the brain chemistry changes when we use a different type of chemical, whether that's a mood stabilizer or a pain pill of any sort, depending on what the receptors are being affected by that particular medication. And I think a lot of times we are in that fast food of healthcare nowadays. We drive by and speak into the clown's nose and let them know, okay, I'm feeling a little depressed, got a little anxiety here, what do I have? And this is to go, hurry up, And
I want relief right now, like instant satisfaction, right? And we don't necessarily have to go through that, right? We don't, and a lot of medications do have side effects. And I agree with you, medication does have its place, but it's like we don't have to be so quick, right? Sometimes all it is just looking within, opening up our heart to be able to heal ourselves and really find resolve.
When we return, we'll be talking more about emotional intelligence. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about emotions, and right before the break, we were talking about how important it is to really get real with our emotions, to understand our emotions, and to clean house with our emotions. We don't realize how a lot of this stuff can stick with us, and we can also begin to think negatively about ourselves. And as we know, negative thoughts have vibrations, negative thoughts carry power, just like positive thoughts do. One of the things that we find oftentimes is that people think that they can just take positive thoughts and cover up the negative thoughts, but that just doesn't work. And those negative vibrational and those energy vibrations. And so joining me in studio is an expert on emotion intelligence, and she's been with us this whole hour. Micaela Passeri joins me in studio. Micaela, let me ask you, so when we've been talking about the energy and we've been talking about this, what are some of the modalities that you use in your own practice to help clients walk through this process?
So I use several different modalities. I use emotion code, neurolinguistic programming, MER, which is mental emotional release technique, tapping. But the major one that I use, and the one that really allows me to connect with the person's subconscious mind to find out what are the trapped emotions that are actually hindering them or that are aggravating an issue, is emotion code. And emotion code is a modality that it's really an energy modality and allows a person, a practitioner, through muscle testing to connect with the person's subconscious mind, and through yes and no answers, find out the emotion that was trapped that was caused by a certain event at a certain age. So you're connecting the dots, event, emotion, age, so that the individual then can allow their subconscious mind to say, okay, this is what's happening. And then when you have that awareness, remember we said at the beginning of of our talk that it's all about awareness, right? And so when the individual can have that inner awareness to where, oh, this is the event that made me feel this way, that had me believe this about myself, or that had me start doing this pattern that then is affecting me today, right? Then they can have that closure, resolve, and they can release that energetic emotion.
Do you find oftentimes too when you're doing this type of modality with a client that oftentimes they can, I guess what I would say is maybe misplace where it's really coming from? So wherever their anger or whatever it is, it might be misplaced on something else, or there might be a fear factor that's created around something that really wasn't in that space, but was in that time within their life. And so, because as children and as we're growing up, we have a tendency of having very black and white thinking. And so we can misplace some of that emotion or kind of pack it down even deeper throughout processes as we're growing up. And do you find that people can misappropriate certain anger or certain fears on things that might not actually be the reason for it?
Absolutely. Because what happens is people want to think that they already know, right? Or that they've already processed or gotten over something. But if we haven't really handled the emotional energy of an issue, then the actual energy of it hasn't gone, right? I was just talking to another lady earlier today about that. It's that consciously, right? Consciously, we can think that we've logically processed ourselves through something, but energetically, we might not have. And so, yes, we can misplace and then judge because we want to actually have resolve, right? And without really going into the subconscious mind and really finding out whether or not that is the case, we're really never going to know, right? So that's part of the work is really finding those events that were defining or that caused a certain surge of energy that the person then wasn't able to process in the moment.
So when you've worked with this type of modality with clients, what is the earliest age that you've had a situation come up with a client? So, what's the earliest that you found? Is it mostly in the teens, or have you been able to go back to even something that was almost not remembered, like 2-3 years old, something like that?
I've actually had someone come up that it was something that happened in vitro.
Wow.
In utero.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I can't obviously specifically talk about the situation, but there was, as we were looking for a trapped emotion, something came up around conception and in utero for this person. And actually she, told me that certain things had happened, that her mom tried to do certain things while she was pregnant with her.
Oh,
and
wow.
So the emotional energy that her mom felt was transferred to the baby, to the fetus, and she held that energy all through her life into her adulthood.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Very negative stuff.
Very negative. Yeah. Yeah. So when when we did this process with her, she had a huge breakthrough because that was kind of the root of a lot of her issues. And it came from several of the events that her mom basically did while she was pregnant.
Wow. Yeah, because I think when, a lot of the stuff that I work with is most people are, honestly, self-esteem, self-worth, not feeling valuable, not feeling good enough. And I think a lot of times, when we're dealing, most of our families did the best they could.
Absolutely, yeah.
Some really didn't, and some did a stellar job. But a lot of times, comments are not realized, the power of comments from a parent, the power of just a look or something that's said. And I think that a lot of people hold on to that stuff forever because most people do not go and get help to even look at this stuff. And then later on down the road, after many different things of devaluing self and putting oneself into bad situations, that's when you kind of look back with a lot of regret. And I don't think there's any age that's too old. I think if you're still alive and you're still alive, it's the time to get well. It's the time to get right.
Absolutely. And what is really important too is to really understand that when we feel and when we think that emotions are not important for us to look at, it's really about our conditioning, right? Our human condition is that we are emotional beings. And as our human condition, pretty much every person on this planet has a not good enough conversation, a not enough conversation. It's part of our humanity, right? And so it is our job to heal that, work through that, so that we can step into that greater version of ourselves. And so when people are afraid of, maybe they don't want to admit that they go to a therapist or they have a coach or whatever, or they do energy work, they're embarrassed because it's a societal thing. But in reality, they're doing they're giving themselves the hugest gift, right? Because that's how that they can actually step into that next and bigger version.
I totally agree with you, and I think we both agree that the fact that when we actually work on ourselves and we actually believe in ourselves enough to work on ourselves, and I think that the most important relationship we can have is with ourselves.
Absolutely.
And if we're not having that relationship of unconditional love, and I'm not talking about egotistical version of self, I'm not talking about the grandiose ideas. That's not real. I'm talking about the unconditional I love myself for who I am at my core all the time, even though I might not have gotten that job promotion, or I might not be considered the prettiest girl at school, whatever the deal is. Because I think a lot of us were basing our love for ourselves on all conditions, and then we base our love on others based on conditions as well, what they've done for us lately, or what they've created for us, or what they bought. And I think that our society is based on that more so than anything.
Absolutely.
And so we don't really see the value of cultivating the value of ourselves.
No, and it is really, self-love is really about the understanding of our intrinsic value as a human being. What are the gifts and talents that we bring to the world? Right. So no matter what's happening in our lives, if we are really grounded in our truth and in our core, and we know who we are and we know the value that we bring, then we can choose self-care and self-love before we allow ourselves maybe to be pushed aside, maybe to be walked all over, whatever it is, right? That we sometimes do, because that's kind of what we learn. We learn to do it in that way. But when we really take that inner look and we look at what we bring, then that's the foundation, right? So the self-love as a foundation of our intrinsic value as a human being, because every single human being on this planet has value.
I agree with you. And when we return in our last segment, we're going to also talk about some things that you can do today, right now, to begin to really work with yourself emotionally and really center yourself, because honestly, the way we treat ourselves directly reflects on the way we treat other people, and we are valuable, and you are a valuable person. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck. Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. We've been talking about emotional intelligence, and better yet, how to deal with your emotions. So Micaela Passeri is actually in studio right now. She's going to actually give us some takeaways today in the show to really help us to understand how to handle our emotions and how to deal with them in the right way. I'm so glad to have you in the studio, because I know that, a lot of times we don't really know, and folks don't know how to deal with their emotions. What are some of your suggestions?
Well, what I'm going to suggest the listeners to do is what I would give as homework to my clients. So the first thing I would say is practice observing your thoughts. Really practice observing what you're thinking and how you're feeling. And if you need to journal, it's always good to do that. In fact, If you want to really be a good student, journal so that you can go back and see how often you are having negative thoughts and negative emotions. You know, as human beings, on average, we have about 50 to 60,000 thoughts per day, and the majority of those are negative. And so if we have negative thoughts, we're also going to have negative emotions. So the first thing is to observe your thoughts. Observe what you're saying to yourself, right? How you're feeling. The second one is once you're noticing that you're experiencing a negative emotion, is to ask yourself 2 questions. What is this about? Like, what is underneath this? Why am I feeling this way? Is there a lesson that I'm meant to learn from this? So you're in an inquisitive state. You know, you're asking. And you'll be surprised that you'll figure it out. You'll get, responses from your subconscious as to what is really underneath it. And then number 3 is choose the next better feeling place. So when we are experiencing negative emotions, especially when we're dealing with anger, frustration, the really big ones, sadness, and it's hard for us to really get out of that state, a really good exercise is to find those things that make you feel better and do them or surround yourself in. And so if it's listening to a beautiful piece of music, you do that. If it's going out with a friend, you do that. If it's meditating or taking a nap, you do that. If it's going and getting a massage, you do that. So you're looking for that next better feeling place so that you can keep yourself in a higher vibrational state and not keep yourself in that negative vibrational state that negative emotion is wanting you to take you down in.
Let me ask you, because I have some ideas on this, but when somebody is going through this process and using some of these techniques and, realizing that they're dealing with these negative type vibration, what should they do when they encounter other folks that might be outwardly negative? Do you feel like they should avoid that type of stuff, or should they get into that emotion, or how does somebody actually deal with that situation when they're trying to overcome their own internal negative dialogue?
Right, man. I mean, this is a question for a whole other show. So the quick and easy answer for that is really set healthy boundaries. If you encounter someone where you feel is very outwardly negative with their words and with their behaviors, but even energetically, just set healthy boundaries. Spend less time with them, interact less with them. And not because you don't like them and not because you want to be mean. You can love them at a distance, but their state of being is not supported of your well-being. And this is part of self-care and self-love, right? You're not coming from a place of being mean to someone, but you're really choosing to take care of your own well-being first. And so if you're around people that are inherently negative or that are what I call energy vampires, right? They suck your energy, they suck the life out of you. Just set healthy boundaries. Maybe interact a little bit less with them so that you can stay in that higher vibrational state.
I agree with you. The energy suckers in our life, and I think that's important because I think we have to always be reminded and remind ourselves that we need to stay on that same plane. It's like anything in life. When you're trying to, let's say, eat well and eat healthier, you really want to put yourself in places that serve healthy foods. You want to be surrounded by people that actually care about being healthy. For you that out there that have stopped drinking, the last thing you want to do is surround yourself at a bar with people just drinking and going crazy. Set yourself up for success, not for failure. And you and I've talked about this. It's interesting how, our cycles and life is so cyclical in a situation, but we can get in those toxic cycles, and you could have the best of intentions. And you can have the best of intentions to do the right thing, but yet we fall right back into that old way of doing things. So there you are trying to better your life, but then you fall back into the old cycle. Well, kind of falling into that crowd. And sometimes we have to do things that are uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Right?
We have to get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because that next better feeling place sometimes is outside of your comfort zone. And it means that sometimes you just have to make some tough decisions. But you always have to keep in mind that it is for your greater good, and it's for your own well-being.
And some of the most amazing times comes out of the confusion and the uncomfortability. But you have to, this is another thing about getting real with your emotions.
Absolutely.
Because I think we get really weird feeling. We get out of our element when we're doing something that's not something we normally do. So we have to get real with that feeling. We have to get right with that feeling. And sometimes that means we just have to walk through that. You know what they say, when you're walking through hell, don't turn back around, just keep on walking. You got to walk through it and feel it and understand that this too shall pass. And I think that another thing too, when we put energy level on things, is to say, will this impact me in 2 weeks from now? If something's not going to impact you in 2 weeks from now, making this change or going through this uncomfortable state, then we need to kind of let it go and realize that this is not a big thing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Powerful stuff, powerful stuff. Let me ask you, if somebody is wanting to get in touch with you after listening to the show, how do they find you?
Well, they can go to my website, www.loveyourevolution.com, and that's LOVEYOU revolution.com. Otherwise, also known as Love Your Evolution. It's actually a double entendre there, but either way,
that.
They can find me.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
And so you can definitely find her there because, if you're working through something like this or you feel like this is a good approach, you obviously are really good at this and with the emotional code. And I actually walked through it with her as well. I was like, what was that thing you did to me?
Right.
But very powerful stuff and lasting thoughts for our listeners tonight.
Just, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to go there. And know that there is absolutely a world of possibilities on the other side. So dig deep, do the work, and you'll find that you'll be able to live your life with ease and grace.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to have you in studio. And just remember to continue to live your true life and to realize that there is a truth there. And sometimes, yes, we have to dig, but we will find it. I care about you. And in the meantime, remember that Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. Well, I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.